Ladies and gentlemen, how are you? The information I'm about to tell you, again, take with a grain of salt, and it's somewhat heavy and complex, but this is what I got over the last couple of days since doing the prior live stream, so you can basically consider this a continuation of that. And to clear up some things, first and foremost, Osiris is not Satan. Um, he is his salaried employee, for lack of a better word. Not hourly, but salary. Um, and this story and its origins are inconceivably older than Osiris. And I kept seeing in my mind's eye yesterday the white mist, the ethereal realm, and this soul basically inside of it. And I'm observing this soul, and I keep seeing over and over again this person in my mind's eye. And very beautiful, very, very beautiful, blonde, curly hair. Um, More a man than a woman. And this soul, he lived in eternal bliss. He had no conception of duality. So remember how we discussed yesterday that how could Satan have created duality if he was, or what did he rebel against if duality is already part of the nature of existence? Well, that's actually a little bit more complicated than I realized, and I'm going to get into that. But he was basically an innocent child, not knowing any better. Remember how we were talking about ignorance is bliss yesterday? That's all he knew was love and bliss and peace and unity. And he his curiosity got to him. So one thing I need you to understand is just because in the eternal light singularity, which is God, you can access all information, but you're not all knowing. And this is the same with him, with this individual. It's like there's a 99% chance that there's a guy in Jacksonville, Florida named Bob Smith who goes fishing at 3 p.m. every Friday. Do I know that 100%? I could access that information if I really wanted to. And there's definitely an Inga who lives in Copenhagen, Denmark. But do I know 100% that Inga? It's the same sort of idea. You don't know every single person on Earth, right? And it's the same idea. So he was curious. He was curious. He wanted to see more. He wanted to observe different things. And so he asked a master soul to show him something different that he's not used to. And the first thing that comes into my mind's eye is that he's observing a man and a woman. So he's in the ethereal realm. Let me just clear this up before I go any further. God is yin and yang. There is the infinite light polarity and the infinite dark polarity. You have the infinite light, which is as infinitely large as it is infinitely small. And then the void, which continues on forever. The positive and negative polarities cause friction with each other. That friction is what sparks the spiral and endless cycle of creative forces. It creates form, it creates consciousness, it creates awareness, and it loops in on itself. Okay? So he was shown something he did not know, the material realms. I don't know if this was Earth exactly. I got the sense that this was a very old cycle, like prior to the existence of this Earth, in many, many previous Big Bangs before that, that this observation was taking place. And it looked like prehistoric times. You had a man and a woman. They're dressed in what you would consider to be a hunter-gatherer society would be dressed in. They had spears. And he really loved this couple. He really loved this couple. He observed them incessantly and almost obsessively. And so, remember, even though he's in timelessness, he can condense his consciousness from expanded awareness and contract it to observe what we would consider to be linear time. And that's what he was observing in this material realm, which he never even knew existed. Okay? He's observing, and he's infatuated with this couple, their love towards each other, their affection towards each other, their joy. They were happy. They were living a very simple life, and they were very happy. And one day he observes them, and the woman was out picking berries, and a lion attacks the woman and eats her alive. And this loose Satan individual sees this, and he's now flooded with emotions he's never had before. He's always felt only bliss, only joy, only love, only unity. He now is in a state of shock and despair. He is now observing the man who's the woman who just, he's out observing the man, and he sees and feels his deep distress, his horror, his pain of not being able to save his woman. And he is so distraught by this that he asks the Master Soul, what is this? Why? And then, returns the woman into the infinite light. And he asks her, why did you experience that? What good did that do? That was horrifying. Was that not something that, that was terrible for you? And she responded by saying, it's essential for my partner who's still there to learn to overcome grief and to bypass that so that he can become a stronger soul. And it was done specifically for his sake that I be eaten by this lion. And then she shows the lion and how it was not his fault, that the lion was simply doing what the duality nature is forcing the lion to do. He's hungry. So Satan is not fulfilled with this explanation. So he asked the Master Soul to go see this woman's book of life, because prior to her incarnation was a written book. And he observes this book, and he goes over it, and he asks, who wrote it? And the Master Soul responds, no one did. And he said, the words can't just appear on the page by themselves. And he says, the words have always been spoken. And so it's a retro-causality loop. The woman incarnates, writes the book writes the woman. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Okay? No one knows. It's always been there. So what happens next? Unfulfilled and in distress, even while still being and living in this bliss and harmony, he set out, he had an agenda to discover the origin of the yin and yang, the friction of God, and why it exists. He was not kicked out of the infinite singularity, he ejected himself out of there into the infinite void. But before he did that, he observed more duality. He observed more strife and conflict. And this is where the irony is. I'm going to lose subscribers for just saying this. As before he ejected himself and he's observing this conflict and this duality, he tries to prevent it. He actually tries to actively step into these material realms and stop the bloodshed from happening, which is the exact opposite of what you would think of Satan, right? And Master Souls were not very pleased that he was doing this, because they're saying you have to allow things to unfold as they are. Okay, so he ejected himself, infinite singularity, into the infinite void. The infinite void contains all the information of reality, just as the infinite light does. There are 17 dimensions. He explores a particular dimension, and this came into my mind's eye like a ton of bricks. I don't know what this means exactly, but he said, it came into my mind's eye, fractal arcane realms. He explored fractal arcane realms. And then the first thing that comes to mind, arcane, archon. So this is the 13th dimension. And what was known to me was that this is the origin, the very ancient origin that's beyond this realm, of why there's no 13th floor in many cultures in an elevator, is because the 13th dimension is known as the fractal arcane realms. And what does that mean exactly? That means these are realms in which your standard progression of form and observation and mathematics do not synchronize in any coherent ways. So, um, for example, Rick and Morty, the cartoon, is really good at showing things like that. I know a lot of you know what that is. Where, Morty would find himself in a dimension where there's infinite selves just spread out forever. Or there would be like just patterns that exist that don't have any cohesion to them. Very dense planes as well, and very dark ones too. Very, very dark ones. And so, why is he exploring this realm? Because he wants to know the origin of what he initially observed, which was the woman, the lion eating the woman. Why this has always existed, essentially. So, in these fractal arcane realms, he's observing this, and this is essentially what is a science experiment, what he's conducting. He's trying to see why this is here. He's so disturbed by it, frustrated, unable to come with any sensible conclusion. He always ends up back at square one, okay? So he goes out there, and his thesis ends up being him back at the same place. Retro-causality. His observation of the lion eating the woman created the duality, which created his observation, which keeps the infinite loop going. So essentially, he's the archetype of duality. Him. But the odd thing is that duality has always existed. But he didn't know it did. So how could he be the origin of it? It's his observation that's creating this retro-causality loop. So, what does he do next? The ends justify the means. Okay, do you know what that means? The ends justify the means. That means that's a saying a lot of dictators throughout history have said. who have justified genocide, murder, loot, plunder, and pillage because they said if we do this now, then the future is going to be brighter, right? These evil scumbags. That's what happened to him. Unable to solve the riddle of duality, he is now in it for total annihilation. So if he can't solve the riddle, he's going to destroy the yin and yang. He wants to create so much chaos and disorder and disharmony that the negative polarity would overrun the light and they would cancel each other out. Of course, this is ridiculous. You can't cancel God. But he thinks that he can. And so that's his infinite agenda, so to speak. And so even if he were to succeed, extinguishing all of creation and all of consciousness and its observational factors, it would spontaneously combust again and continue. It would recreate itself in a form of a sort of Big Bang, for lack of a better term. The singularity doesn't disappear, it just reforms. But he's set out to create a situation where he thinks that he could extinguish all of creation, and by extinguishing all of creation, he could stop all duality. He could stop all pain, and that's why the ends justify the means. He's creating horror now by using people like Lilith, Osiris, these Egyptian gods in our particular situation, and we're by no means the only planet of chaos. No. He gobbles them up like lunch. And he's just in this endless pattern of trying to get to the bottom of this. But what ends up happening every single time is that he just ends up at square one, observing the lion again. And he created this loop for himself, essentially. Observing the lion, ejecting himself into the infinite void, observing the fractal arcane realm, trying to mathematically solve duality to where his initial intent was to just extinguish duality out completely. Failing at that, frustrated, now his goal is to destroy all of reality. So this is kind of a sad story, ladies and gentlemen. And it's retro-causality because his observation creates the duality, which creates the observation, and it's in an infinite loop. Take whatever you want from this. Um, the odd thing is that I don't know. It's really a tough one to wrap your head around. And it's really hard to it's overwhelming, okay? If this is real information, this is very overwhelming. And it is for me. So, goodbye.